An era of dominance, drama, and destiny. A decade that gave us champions, heartbreakers, legends, and a few who simply tried to survive. From world champions to one-race wonders, we're ranking every single Formula One driver who raced through the 2010s. From the heroes who defined a generation, to the forgotten names you barely remember. 64. Esteban Tuero may not be a household name among the greats of Formula One, but his story echoes through the margins of the sport's history, a reminder of how fleeting opportunity can be at its highest level. Though his racing prime belonged to an earlier generation, his name occasionally resurfaces in conversations about drivers who flashed potential but never had the machinery, timing, or stability to truly prove themselves. He was young, ambitious, and raw, stepping into a world that demanded not just speed but political survival, something many promising drivers of the 2010s would later discover in their own ways. In an era dominated by names like Hamilton, Vettel, Alonso, and Rosberg, Tuero's quiet reference stands almost symbolic, a shadowed contrast to the glamour of world champions. While others built legacies on podiums and trophies, he represented those who entered the arena with hope and talent, but left before the story could fully unfold. It's easy to forget the ones who didn't make the highlight reels, but they are part of what makes Formula One human. The heartbreak beneath the horsepower, the dreams that ran out of laps. The 2010s would come to be ruled by legends who shaped the sport forever. Yet in the background lingered the ghosts of past drivers like Tuero, reminders that Formula One has always been a brutal test of fate as much as skill. His name, faint as an echo, still carries meaning, a footnote that whispers of what might have been, and a thin, fragile line that separates the remembered from the forgotten. 63. Davide Valsecchi was one of those drivers whose story never quite reached the heights his talent once promised. Born in Italy and crowned the GP2 champion in 2012, he stood at the doorway of Formula One with a kind of pedigree that usually earns a long career on the grid. Yet, timing and circumstance often decide a driver's fate as much as speed does. Valsecchi joined Lotus as a reserve driver during one of the team's most competitive phases, shadowing stars like Kimi Räikkönen and Romain Grosjean. He waited, learned, and hoped, but when the moment came for a race seat in 2013 after Räikkönen's sudden exit, the team overlooked him, choosing an outsider instead. For a man who had just conquered the F1 feeder series, that decision was devastating. What made Valsecchi stand out wasn't just his raw pace, but his attitude. Even as doors quietly closed, he stayed connected to the sport, often smiling, always positive, never bitter. His transition from driver to broadcaster showed another side of his passion, the ability to turn knowledge and heartbreak into charm and humor. Fans came to love him for his energy on camera, his genuine enthusiasm, and his emotional authenticity. He became proof that there's life, even laughter, after the dream ends. Davide Valsecchi's name might never be etched beside the champions of the 2010s, but his story remains one of resilience and grace. In a decade filled with mechanical precision and political battles, he reminded people that Formula One isn't just about those who win. It's also about those who tried, who dreamed, and who stayed true to their love of racing even when the spotlight moved on. 62. Jerome D'Ambrosio's Formula One career was brief, yet his journey reflected the grit and adaptability of a driver who refused to fade quietly. Born in Belgium, he entered F1 in 2011 with Marussia Virgin Racing, one of the struggling new teams that fought just to finish races rather than chase podiums. The car was slow, unreliable, and far from the front, but Jerome carried himself with professionalism, extracting what he could and rarely putting a wheel wrong. In a sport where results often depend more on machinery than skill, he became a quiet symbol of persistence, a driver who worked with what he had and made it look respectable. When Lotus called him up in 2012 to replace Romain Grosjean for a single race, D'Ambrosio finally got a shot in a competitive car. It was Monza, fast, iconic, and unforgiving. He didn't set the world alight that weekend, but he brought the car home safely and reminded everyone that composure under pressure is its own kind of skill. It was a moment that showed both the opportunity and cruelty of Formula One. Sometimes, even when you do everything right, the window stays small. After leaving F1, Jerome D'Ambrosio found a second life in Formula E, where he reinvented himself as a race winner and team leader. His calm presence and technical understanding became invaluable in shaping teams behind the scenes, eventually leading him into management roles. His name might not sit beside Hamilton or Vettel in the record books, but his path tells another truth about motorsport, that grace, intelligence, and quiet determination can leave a mark long after the engine stops. 61. Lucas di Grassi's time in Formula One was short, but his story didn't end there, only changed tracks. Born in Sao Paulo, he arrived in F1 in 2010 with a brand new Virgin Racing team, one of those ambitious outfits that promise innovation but struggle to even finish races. The car was unreliable and underdeveloped, and Lucas spent most weekends wrestling with machinery that barely belonged on the same lap as the leaders. Yet, even in the chaos, he showed professionalism and a deep understanding of race strategy. He wasn't reckless or desperate for headlines. He was methodical, perhaps too thoughtful for the raw survival game that early career Formula One can be. When his F1 chapter closed after just one season, many assumed that was it. But Di Grassi quietly built one of the most impressive second acts in modern motorsport. He became a development driver for Pirelli, helping to shape the very tires the championship would rely on for years. Then, when Formula E launched in 2014, he found his true arena. From a very first race, literally the first Formula E winner in history, he became the face of electric racing. His intelligence, consistency, and outspoken advocacy for sustainable technology made him more than just a racer. He became a visionary for what the sport could become. Looking back, Lucas di Grassi's single F1 season feels a footnote, but his legacy runs far deeper. Where many drivers chase speed alone, he chased meaning, turning disappointment into reinvention, and using racing as a platform for change. In the story of 2010's motorsport, his name stands as proof that sometimes a real victory isn't on Sunday afternoon, but in how you redefine the game afterward. That Jamie Alguersuari's story in Formula One reads like a fast-burning flame, bright, promising, and gone too soon. Born in Barcelona, he broke records before he even turned 20, becoming the youngest driver ever to start a Formula One race when he debuted for Toro Rosso in 2009. For a moment, he looked like the future of Spanish motorsport, talented, articulate, and fearless. In the early 2010s, racing alongside Sebastian Buemi, he showed flashes of genuine speed and maturity beyond his years. But F1 can be unforgiving, and when Red Bull's driver program decided to clear space for new blood, both he and Buemi were suddenly left without seats. Just like that, a career that was supposed to soar never got the time to unfold. What made Alguersuari's story different was what came next. Instead of chasing a hopeless return to F1, he walked away from the sport entirely, still in his 20s, and turned to his other passion, music, rebranding himself as a DJ and producer. He found the kind of peace and creative expression that Formula One rarely allows. He once admitted that the Red Bull system drained him emotionally, leaving him unsure of who he was outside the cockpit. Music gave him that identity back, allowing him to redefine success on his own terms. Jamie Alguersuari's Formula One journey might look brief on paper, but in truth, it was one of the decade's most human stories. He arrived too young, left too soon, and learned something that many in the sport never do, that there's life beyond speed, and that walking away doesn't always mean losing. In an era defined by relentless ambition, his quiet departure became an act of self-preservation and courage. 59. Sebastian Buemi's Formula One story sits in that curious space between what was and what might have been. The Swiss driver arrived in 2009 as part of Red Bull's junior program, driving for Toro Rosso at a time when the team was still finding its identity. He was sharp, intelligent, and technically gifted, the kind of driver engineers love to work with. Over 3 seasons, Buemi delivered steady performances in midfield machinery, showing composure under pressure and a knack for salvaging results others might have thrown away. But when Red Bull decided to reshuffle its lineup at the end of 2011, he, like Jamie Alguersuari, found himself abruptly cut adrift, replaced not for lack of talent, but to make room for the next wave of hopefuls. For many, that might have been the end of the story. But Buemi refused to let Formula One define the limits of his career. He stayed close to the Red Bull family as a test and simulator driver, quietly contributing to the success of the main team during its championship years. Beyond the paddock, he became a giant in endurance racing, winning multiple World Endurance Championships and conquering the 24 Hours of Le Mans with Toyota. Then came Formula E, where Buemi rediscovered his spark and became one of the series' earliest champions, proving that his adaptability and consistency could shine just as bright in electric silence as in the roar of combustion engines. Sebastian Buemi's journey is one of quiet resilience, a story of a man who didn't need the spotlight of Formula One to validate his worth. While he never stood on an F1 podium, his success beyond it made him one of the most complete and respected drivers of his generation. In an age obsessed with glory, Buemi's career became a lesson in endurance, that true racers don't fade when the grid closes. They simply find new tracks to conquer. 58. Robert Doornbos' connection to Formula One sits at the edges of the sport's memory, but his journey reflects a deeper truth about how hard it is to stay in the world's most demanding racing arena. A Dutch driver with charisma, confidence, and real speed, Doornbos made his brief mark in the mid-2000s with Minardi and Red Bull Racing. By the time the 2010s arrived, he was already more of a ghost in the F1 story, a reminder of the ambitious talents who never got the machinery or momentum to truly show what they could do. He was quick, marketable, and full of energy, but Formula One's revolving door moves fast. And by the time new generations emerged for Verstappen, Ricciardo, Sainz, his chapter had quietly closed. Yet, Doornbos was never the kind of man to fade away quietly. After F1, he reinvented himself with remarkable ease, racing in IndyCar, joining A1GP for the Netherlands, and later becoming a familiar, confident voice in motorsport media. What set him apart wasn't just his skill behind the wheel, but his personality. Sharp, articulate, and always slightly flamboyant, with the kind of confidence that made him stand out in interviews as much as on the track. In later years, he embraced his role as an ambassador for Dutch motorsport, helping nurture the culture that would eventually produce a world champion in Max Verstappen. Robert Doornbos may not be a defining figure of the 2010s grid, but his story still hums beneath it. That of a man who touched a dream, let it slip, and still found a way to turn it into something meaningful. His legacy isn't in trophies or records, but in the attitude he carried. Proof that even if you don't conquer Formula One, you can still live a life shaped by its fire. 57. Karun Chandhok's time in Formula One was brief, but it carried the quiet weight of history and ambition. As one of the few Indian drivers to reach the pinnacle of motorsport, his arrival in 2010 with the newly formed Hispania racing team wasn't just about personal achievement. It was symbolic. He stepped into a car that was underfunded, untested, and often seconds off the pace, yet he handled it with professionalism and grace. For much of that year, Chandhok was fighting not for points or podiums, but simply to finish races, to keep the car running, and to represent his country on the grandest stage of all. In a sport where opportunity is often tied to resources, he made every lap count, knowing the odds were stacked against him from the start. When his F1 stint ended, Chandhok didn't vanish into the long list of forgotten names. Instead, he adapted, becoming a respected voice and mind within motorsport. He raced in endurance events like Le Mans, tested for Lotus, and eventually transitioned into broadcasting and analysis. His commentary, thoughtful and measured, reflected a driver's understanding of the sport's complexities, both on and off the track. Over time, he became one of Formula One's most articulate ambassadors, representing the rare blend of technical knowledge and humility that fans and insiders came to respect deeply. Karun Chandhok's Formula One career might not have been filled with podiums or points, but was grounded in persistence, intellect, and quiet pride. He carried the dream of a nation that had barely begun to imagine itself in Formula One. And though his chapter behind the wheel was short, his influence has lasted far longer. In many ways, Chandhok's legacy is proof that not every victory in motorsport happens at 200 miles per hour. Some are earned through endurance, insight, and the courage to open doors for those who come next. 56. Marcus Winkelhock's name might not echo through Formula One's modern halls, but his story remains one of those rare, almost mythical chapters that remind us how unpredictable the sport can be. A German driver from a respected racing family, he made just a single Formula One start, the 2007 European Grand Prix at the Nürburgring. Yet, in that one race, he created a legend. Driving for Spyker, one of the smallest teams on the grid, Winkelhock made a daring call to start on wet tires as rain began to fall on the formation lap. Within minutes, chaos unfolded. Cars were spinning, leaders were sliding off, and Marcus, in a car built for survival, not speed, found himself leading the race by over half a minute. For 6 surreal laps, a rookie from a backmarker team was out front, a symbol of pure opportunism and fearless instinct. When the race was stopped and conditions changed, reality caught up. The bigger teams recovered, and Winkelhock's miracle run ended in retirement. Yet those few laps were enough to etch his name into Formula One folklore. He never started another Grand Prix, but that fleeting moment of brilliance became the kind of story every fan loves to tell. Proof that, for a brief instant, anything is possible in this sport. After Formula One, Winkelhock built a solid career in touring cars and endurance racing, where his precision and teamwork found a better home. He went on to win major GT events, including the 24 Hours of Nürburgring, showing that his talent was never in question, only his timing. Marcus Winkelhock's tale is a reminder that legacy in Formula One isn't always about longevity or titles. Sometimes it's about one perfect decision, one storm, and a few unforgettable laps that turn a name into legend. 55. Luca Badoer's story in Formula One is one of loyalty, endurance, and the quiet sacrifices that rarely make headlines. An Italian driver who spent much of his career in the shadows of the sports giants, Badoer was never the star of the show, but he was often a man behind it. After racing sporadically through the 1990s with struggling teams like Minardi and Forti, he became Ferrari's long-serving test driver, a role he held for over a decade. In that time, he helped develop some of the most dominant cars in Ferrari's history, turning thousands of test laps and contributing to the performance that powered Schumacher's golden era. Yet while others lifted trophies, Badoer stayed in the background, unseen but invaluable. His brief return to racing in 2009, after Felipe Massa's horrific accident, should have been a moment of reward and recognition. But Formula One is rarely sentimental. Having been out of competitive racing for nearly 10 years, Badoer was thrown into a world that had changed dramatically. Faster cars, tougher competition, and no time to adjust. He struggled through 2 painful weekends of Valencia and Spa, finishing last both times, and the same paddock that once respected his dedication turned quickly to criticism. It was a harsh ending to a career built on service and patience, and one that exposed how unforgiving Formula One can be to those who wait too long for a chance. Still, Luca Badoer's contribution to the sport runs deeper than results or records. He was a craftsman, a driver who understood the rhythm of machines and the value of teamwork. His years of tireless testing shaped cars that defined an era, even if his own name was rarely written in bold. In a world obsessed with glory, Badoer's story reminds us that Formula One also belongs to those who give everything and ask for nothing in return. 54. André Lotterer's Formula One career lasted for just a single Grand Prix, but his story stretches far beyond those 60 laps. A driver of immense skill and mechanical sympathy, Lotterer was already a world-class racer long before he ever lined up on an F1 grid. By 2014, when Caterham called him in to fill a vacant seat at the Belgian Grand Prix, he was a multiple Le Mans winner and one of endurance racing's most respected names. For fans who knew his resume, his one-off debut felt like a long-overdue nod from Formula One, an invitation extended too late. At Spa-Francorchamps, one of the most demanding circuits in the world, Lotterer climbed into a car that was barely competitive. Yet even in a backmarker machine, he made an impression, out-qualifying his far more experienced teammate and showing flashes of control that betrayed his endurance racing pedigree. His race ended early with mechanical failure, but for those who watched closely, his composure and precision were unmistakable. He wasn't there to chase a career. He was there to enjoy the pure craft of driving at the highest level, even if only for one afternoon. After that cameo, Lotterer returned to the arenas that made him a legend, winning again in the World Endurance Championship, excelling in Formula E, and continuing to demonstrate the kind of versatility few modern drivers possess. His story is proof that greatness in motorsport isn't confined to Formula One. Some drivers build legacies not to the number of races they start, but through the mastery they display wherever they compete. André Lotterer didn't need a full season to show he belonged among the best. One weekend at Spa was enough to remind the racing world what true class looks like. 50. Sergei Sirotkin's time in Formula One was brief, but it reflected both the promise and the pressure of modern motorsport. The young Russian arrived in 2018 as part of Williams' driver lineup, stepping into a team that had once been a powerhouse but was deep in decline. For Sirotkin, it was a strange debut, a chance to prove himself on the world stage, but in a car that couldn't show the best of what he could do. Still, he approached the season with maturity and discipline, refusing to let frustration turn into recklessness. His results rarely made headlines, but his feedback, consistency, and work ethic earned quiet respect from those inside the garage. What made Sirotkin stand out wasn't just his technical understanding, but his determination to learn. Even as he battled near the back of the grid, he approached Formula One like an engineer as much as a driver, diving into data, helping diagnose the car's weaknesses, and building relationships across the team. His only point of the season, a 10th-place finish in Italy, came not through luck, but through persistence in a race of attrition. By the time the year ended, Williams chose a new direction, and Sirotkin's F1 journey closed as abruptly as it had begun. But like many drivers whose paths diverged from the sports spotlight, he didn't vanish. Sirotkin transitioned into sports car racing, and later became involved in the technical and management side of motorsport back home in Russia. His F1 story remains short but earnest, the tale of the driver who entered at the wrong time, with the wrong car, yet carried himself with the quiet professionalism of someone who belonged there. In a grid filled with noise and egos, Sergei Sirotkin's single season stood out for something rare: dignity in difficulty, and a reminder that even those at the back of the pack have stories worth remembering. 52. Pascal Wehrlein's journey through Formula One was one of talent, timing, and the tough reality that speed alone isn't always enough to stay. Born in Germany to a Mauritian mother and a German father, Wehrlein rose through the junior ranks with a reputation of a prodigy, sharp, confident, and relentlessly fast. When he won the DTM championship in 2015 at just 20 years old, becoming the youngest ever to do so, Mercedes backed him as one of their brightest prospects. A Formula One seat soon followed with Manor in 2016, a small, struggling team, but a starting point nonetheless. In that underdog car, Wehrlein quickly showed flashes of brilliance. His precision behind the wheel and ability to extract performance from limited machinery impressed even the veterans in the paddock. The highlight came at the Austrian Grand Prix, where he dragged the Manor to an unlikely point, a feat that felt almost like a victory for a team fighting simply to exist. The next year with Sauber brought more experience but little reward, as the team languished at the back of the grid. Despite strong performances against his teammate Marcus Ericsson, politics and sponsorship pressures began to outweigh talent in the fight for seats. By 2018, Wehrlein found himself without a place on the grid, a casualty of Formula One's harsh economics rather than a lack of ability. Yet, like so many who fall for the cracks of F1, Wehrlein reinvented himself. He moved into Formula E, where his speed and precision found a new home, earning podiums and establishing him as one of the sharpest drivers in electric racing. His story is a quiet reminder that Formula One doesn't always reward the fastest, but those who survive the longest. Pascal Wehrlein's career may have flickered briefly at the sport's highest level, but his adaptability, focus, and refusal to disappear have kept his legacy alive, a symbol of how talent endures, even when opportunity fades. 51. Rio Haryanto's story in Formula One was brief but groundbreaking, a moment that carried pride far beyond the boundaries of racing. When he joined Manor Racing in 2016, he became the first Indonesian driver ever to start a Formula One Grand Prix. For millions of fans back home, his debut wasn't just about motorsport. It was about representation, the realization that someone from a country outside F1's traditional heartlands could make the grid. He arrived with a strong junior resume, years of dedication, and an aura of quiet determination, ready to face a challenge that few could imagine. Driving for Manor, though, was an uphill battle. The car was underpowered, the funding limited, and the team constantly fighting to stay afloat. Haryanto found himself competing not just against other drivers, but against the financial realities that haunt small teams. Despite that, he brought a sense of composure and focus to every race weekend. His performances were solid, not spectacular, but clean, professional, and improving with every lap. Behind the scenes, his humility and respect for the sport made him well-liked among engineers and fans alike. But midway through the season, the funding that helped secure his seat ran out, and with it, his F1 dream ended abruptly after just 12 races. Yet even in that short span, Rio Haryanto's impact endured. He opened doors for Southeast Asian talent and inspired a generation of young racers who saw themselves reflected for the first time on the world stage. While his time in Formula One was fleeting, it was deeply meaningful, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful stories in the sport aren't about victory or titles, but about arrival. Rio Haryanto's name may not sit beside the champions, but for Indonesia and much of Asia, he remains a symbol of possibility, the proof that the world's fastest stage could belong to anyone brave enough to reach it. 50. Jules Bianchi's story is one of brilliance, promise, and heartbreak, a tale that still lingers in the quiet corners of Formula One. Born into a racing family, Jules carried a natural grace behind the wheel that made him stand out from the start. He was quick, smooth, and composed, the kind of driver who made speed look effortless. By the time he joined Marussia in 2013, his potential was already well known within the paddock. He wasn't a competitive car, but what he did with that machinery bordered on extraordinary. In a backmarker team that usually fought just to avoid last place, Bianchi drove like someone who belonged at the front. His defining moment came at the 2014 Monaco Grand Prix, one of those races that would have been unthinkable if you hadn't seen it happen. In a Marussia that had no business near the points, he drove a perfect, aggressive, yet controlled race to finish ninth, scoring the team's first and only points. For the small outfit, it was a victory. For Bianchi, it was a statement. Ferrari had already marked him as a future driver, a successor in waiting. Everyone could see it. The poise, the intelligence, the rare calm that separated great drivers from merely fast ones. But in Japan, later that same year, fate struck with a cruelty that words can barely capture. In wet, low-visibility conditions at Suzuka, Bianchi lost control and collided with a recovery vehicle. The accident left him with severe head injuries, and after months in a coma, he passed away in July 2015. He was just 25 years old. His death shook Formula One to its core, not only because of the loss of a future champion, but because of the person he was. Humble, kind, and deeply respected by everyone around him. In the years since, his legacy has lived on in improved safety measures, in the halo system that may have saved others, and in the career of Charles Leclerc, who has often said that Jules paved the way for him. Jules Bianchi's story reminds us that behind the speed and spectacle, Formula One is still a deeply human sport, one where dreams, no matter how bright, can be heartbreakingly fragile. 49. Well, Stevens' time in Formula may first have been short, but it reflected the sheer determination required to reach the sport's highest level, even when the odds are impossibly steep. A British driver who worked his way up through karting and junior formulas, Stevens arrived in F1 during one of its most turbulent periods for small teams. He made his debut with Caterham at the 2014 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, a one-race call-up for a team already on the brink of financial collapse. It was a surreal introduction. A single race in an unstable car, just to keep a fading team alive long enough to finish the season. For most drivers, that might have been the end of the road, but for Stevens, it was just the start of a quiet fight to stay on the grid. In 2015, he joined Manor Marussia, a team that had barely survived bankruptcy and was rebuilding from scratch. The car was slow, outdated, and far from reliable, but Stevens approached the challenge with professionalism and calm. His season became a study in endurance rather than glory, racing for survival, finding small improvements, and helping keep a team spirit alive in one of Formula One's toughest years. He didn't score points, but his work ethic and willingness to persevere through frustration left a lasting impression on those who worked with him. When his Formula One chapter closed, Stevens did what many overlooked drivers have done best. He reinvented himself. He moved into endurance racing, where his intelligence, consistency, and teamwork found the recognition Formula One couldn't give him. Competing at Le Mans and in GT championships, he proved that a driver's worth isn't measured only by headlines or podiums. Well, Stevens' story is a quiet one, but it speaks to the heart of motorsport: perseverance, professionalism, and a belief that even in the smallest teams, every lap still matters. 48. Gito van der Garde's journey through Formula One was short stormy and unforgettable, a mix of promise, politics, and defiance that left his name etched into the sport's memory in a way few expected. The Dutch driver made his debut in 2013 with Caterham, a team fighting for survival at the back of the grid. Even with limited machinery, he showed flashes of talent and confidence, especially in qualifying sessions where he occasionally dragged the car further up the order than it had any right to be. His aggressive yet intelligent driving hinted at someone capable of more. But in Formula One, talent is only half the battle. Timing, money, and opportunity make up the rest. By 2015, Van der Garde found himself in the middle of one of F1's most dramatic off-track disputes. After serving as Sauber's reserve driver and signing a valid race contract, he was abruptly dropped before the season began, replaced by better-funded newcomers. What followed was a surreal spectacle, a legal battle that spilled into headlines and courtrooms, culminating in a courtroom victory that technically gave him the right to race at the Australian Grand Prix, though in practice it was too chaotic to make happen. The fight was messy, public, and deeply human, one driver standing up against a system that often chews through dreams without accountability. After that saga, Van der Garde stepped away from Formula One, but not from racing. He rebuilt his career in endurance and GT racing, becoming a respected competitor known for his speed and maturity. Over time, fans came to see him less as the man caught in a legal fight, and more as a symbol of resilience, a driver who refused to be silenced by the politics of the paddock. Gito van der Garde's Formula One story might have been brief, but it carried a rare honesty. He reminded the world that behind the helmets and headlines, drivers are not just passengers in the system. They're individuals fighting for fairness in a sport that often forgets it. 47. Max Chilton's Formula One career was defined by determination, composure, and a quiet professionalism that often went unnoticed amid the chaos of the midfield and the glamour of the front. A British driver with a polished reputation from the junior ranks, he made his F1 debut in Marussia in 2013, a team operating on the very edge of survival. The car was far from competitive, but Chilton treated every race like a masterclass in endurance and consistency. In his rookie season, he finished every race, a rare feat in modern Formula One, and a quiet achievement that spoke to his mechanical sympathy and focus. For a team fighting just to finish weekends, that kind of dependability meant everything. His second season in 2014 brought more of the same calm resolve, even as tragedy and financial strain surrounded the team. When his teammate, Jules Bianchi, suffered the devastating accident at Suzuka, the emotional toll on the entire Marussia family was immense. Chilton carried himself with grace during one of the sport's darkest moments, representing his team and friend with maturity far beyond his years. By the end of the season, the team collapsed under financial pressure, and with it went Chilton's Formula One chapter, a career that never had the machinery to show how far his talent could reach. After leaving F1, Chilton turned to IndyCar, where he found new challenges and a chance to race on more equal footing. There, he showed flashes of the same calm precision that defined his time in Formula One, including a strong run at the Indianapolis 500. Max Chilton's name might not appear in the record books next to champions, but his story is one of quiet perseverance. In a sport that often glorifies aggression and ego, he was the opposite, steady, thoughtful, and dependable. His legacy is a reminder that sometimes success in Formula One isn't measured in podiums or points, but in the quiet dignity of finishing every race in a world where so many don't. 46. Charles Pique's time in Formula One was brief, understated, and yet emblematic of what it means to fight on the margins of the sport. A French driver with calm precision and technical intelligence, he arrived in Formula One in 2012 with Marussia, one of those small, underfunded teams that existed less to win and more to survive. The car was unpredictable, often off the pace, but Piquet handled it with maturity and consistency beyond his years. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't desperate. He drove with a quiet understanding that every lap in Formula One, no matter how far from the front, is a privilege earned through years of sacrifice. In 2013, Piquet moved to Caterham, another struggling outfit trying to claw its way up the grid. There, he continued to show flashes of skill, particularly in race management and tire conservation, traits that engineers appreciated even if the world didn't notice. But in a sport where financial strength often matters more than potential, the opportunities quickly thinned. After 2 seasons, and with new sponsorship-driven faces arriving, his Formula One career quietly came to an end. No controversy, no farewell fanfare, just a dignified exit from a world that too often forgets its quieter talents. After Formula One, Pic shifted his focus toward business and management, eventually taking on a leadership role within the logistics and transport sectors, including ties to electric racing operations. His post F1 career reflected the same steadiness he showed on track, thoughtful, strategic, and grounded. Charles Pic's story isn't one of glory or heartbreak, but of quiet professionalism. He represents a generation of drivers who may never have had the machinery to prove their full worth, yet carry themselves with grace in a sport that gives so few the chance to truly shine. 45. Bruno Senna's Formula One story carried the weight of legacy before he ever turned a wheel. As the nephew of the legendary Ayrton Senna, his surname alone came with both expectation and pressure that few in motorsport history have ever had to bear. But Bruno's journey was never about trying to imitate his uncle. It was about finding his own identity in a sport that had immortalized the Senna name. After losing Ayrton at such a young age, Bruno's path to racing was delayed. His family understandably hesitated to let him chase the same dangerous dream. When he finally returned to motorsport in his 20s, he was already years behind his peers, an underdog with a famous name. His Formula One debut came in 2010 with a struggling HRT team, a seat that offered more survival than competition. Yet Bruno carried himself with humility and focus, making the best of a car that was never truly ready for the grid. Over the next 2 years, he found better footing, first as a substitute at Renault in 2011, then as a full-time driver for Williams in 2012. That season was his moment to breathe. He scored consistent points finishes, often outpacing expectations, and managed a rare balance between aggression and control. Still, in a sport that values instant brilliance and deep pockets, stability never came. By the end of 2012, his time in Formula One was over. What followed, though, was perhaps his true legacy. Bruno reinvented himself in endurance racing in Formula E, where his talent and technical intellect thrived. He became a race winner, a Le Mans champion in class, and one of the most respected hybrid-era professionals in motorsport. Unlike many drivers tied to their family name, Bruno managed to step out from his shadow without rejecting it, honoring Ayrton not by trying to replicate him, but by carving his own quiet, intelligent path through racing. His story is one of courage and identity, a man who carried the heaviest name in Formula One history, yet found peace not in comparison, but in authenticity. 44. Narain Karthikeyan's story in Formula One is one of persistence, pride, and quiet trailblazing. As India's first-ever Formula One driver, his journey wasn't just about personal ambition. It was about representing an entire nation stepping onto motorsport's biggest stage for the first time. When he debuted in 2005 with Jordan, Karthikeyan carried the weight of expectation with remarkable composure. He was fast, confident, and unafraid to push, even when the machinery beneath him lagged behind. For many watching back home, seeing an Indian driver line up on the grid was a moment of national awakening, a signal that Formula One wasn't just a European dream anymore. By the time the 2010s arrived, Narain returned for a second chapter with HRT Hispania Racing Team, one of the new, underfunded entrants that lived in the sport's survival zone. The car was heavy, unreliable, and almost never competitive, but Karthikeyan treated it with the same professionalism he always had. His calm presence and technical feedback became invaluable to a team that desperately needed direction. Even when battling near the back of the pack, he drove with the pride of a pioneer, knowing that every lap, however unseen, was building something bigger than results. When his Formula One days ended, Narain didn't fade into obscurity. He continued to race across disciplines, from Super Formula in Japan to endurance and stock car events, always carrying the same quiet determination that had defined him. His legacy in Formula One isn't measured in points or podiums, but in impact. He opened the door for Indian motorsport, paving the way for future talents like Karun Chandhok, and inspiring a generation to believe that Formula One wasn't beyond reach. Narain Karthikeyan's story is one of courage without glamour, a man who fought against the odds not to win, but to make history. 43. Jarno Trulli's Formula One story is one of precision, longevity, and quiet artistry behind the wheel. For over a decade, he was known as one of the sport's smoothest and most technically gifted drivers, a master of qualifying laps, and a man whose control could make even difficult machinery dance. By the time the 2010s arrived, Trulli was already a veteran. He had raced with some of the biggest names, Prost, Renault, Toyota, and had a Grand Prix win to his name for Monaco 2004, a race that perfectly captured his strengths: focus, rhythm, and unflappable calm under pressure. But the sport was changing, and Trulli found himself moving from contender to survivor, still sharp, still proud, but driving now for teams that could no longer match his experience. His final years in Formula One came with Lotus, later Caterham. From 2010 to 2011, a small new outfit fighting to establish itself in an era dominated by giants. The car was modest, often off the pace, yet Trulli's professionalism never wavered. He became the steady hand in a young team, guiding engineers, mentoring rookies, and extracting performance from the car that numbers alone couldn't explain. His Trulli train, the term fans use for the long lines of cars stuck behind his defensive brilliance, became both meme and compliment, proof of his ability to hold his ground against faster rivals through sheer discipline and craft. After leaving Formula One, Trulli continued to embrace the evolution of racing, even entering Formula E with his own team, a move that reflected his enduring love for innovation and competition. His time in F1 might not have ended with fanfare, but Jarno Trulli's legacy endures in subtler ways. He was a driver's driver, precise, intelligent, and deeply respected by his peers. In an era obsessed with aggression, Trulli's elegance behind the wheel reminded the world that sometimes speed isn't about fury, but about grace. 42. Rubens Barrichello's Formula One journey is one of endurance, emotion, and an unshakable love for racing. Over nearly 2 decades, he became the sport's ultimate survivor, the man who lived through multiple eras, raced against legends, and never lost his joy for the fight. By the time the 2010s began, Barrichello was already one of the most experienced drivers in history, yet his spirit remained as youthful as when he debuted in the early 1990s. His final years in Formula One, driving for Braun GP and later Williams, showed not just skill but deep resilience, a reminder that longevity in the sport is its own kind of greatness. In 2009, he played a key role in one of F1's most remarkable fairy tales, the rise of Braun GP from the ashes of Honda. While Jenson Button took the world championship, Barrichello's experience and relentless pace helped anchor the team through its dream season. He won 2 races that year and proved that, even after more than 250 Grands Prix, his hunger was undimmed. When he moved to Williams in 2010 and 2011, the results weren't as dramatic, but his value was in leadership and mentorship. He brought stability, technical feedback, and quiet motivation to a team in transition. Behind the scenes, engineers spoke of his warmth, humor, and precision, the kind of driver who didn't just race cars, but helped build them better. When he finally left Formula One, Barrichello carried with him more starts than any driver in history at the time, 322 Grands Prix, and the respect of a generation. He went on to compete in IndyCar and Stock Car Brazil, still chasing that pure joy of competition. More than anything, Rubens Barrichello's story is about heart. He was never just number 2, never just a veteran. He was a man who loved the sport more than the spotlight. His smile in the paddock, even after decades of triumph and heartbreak, remains one of Formula One's most enduring images. The portrait of a racer who never forgot why he started. 41. Pedro de la Rosa's story in Formula One is one of quiet loyalty, deep intelligence, and a devotion to the craft that went far beyond race results. A Spanish driver whose career spanned over a decade and a half, he was never defined by speed alone, but by his technical mastery and unshakable professionalism. When the 2010s arrived, de la Rosa was already a veteran, a man who had raced for teams like Arrows, Jaguar, and McLaren, and had earned the respect of engineers as one of the sport's finest development drivers. He wasn't a headline maker, but behind the scenes, he was the kind of figure every great team needs, calm, precise, and deeply knowledgeable about how to make a car faster. His final Formula One seasons with HRT in 2012 and 2013 were acts of quiet commitment. The team was struggling at the bottom of the grid, chronically underfunded, and always on the edge of collapse. Yet Pedro, then in his 40s, approached each race as though he were fighting for a championship. He worked tirelessly with engineers, mentoring young mechanics, helping shape a team that, though short-lived, learned from his discipline and care. There was something deeply human about his persistence, a sense that even when the spotlight had moved on, his love for the sport never dimmed. When his racing days ended, De La Rosa's career evolved naturally into mentorship and analysis. He became a test and development driver for Ferrari, a television commentator, and an ambassador for Spanish motorsport. Always articulate, always grounded. Pedro de la Rosa's legacy isn't about podiums or championships. It's about dedication. He represented the kind of racer who treats every role, driver, tester, teacher, with the same respect. In a world built on egos and brief careers, he was a constant, a man who reminded Formula One that behind every victory lies someone quietly perfecting the machine. 40. Daniil Kvyat's story in Formula One is one of raw talent, resilience, and redemption, a career that burned bright, faltered, and then quietly rebuilt itself through sheer determination. The Russian driver burst into the sport in 2014 with Toro Rosso, earning instant attention for his speed and composure at just 19 years old. His debut season was sharp and fearless, the kind that made Red Bull take notice. By the next year, he was promoted to the senior Red Bull racing team, replacing none other than Sebastian Vettel, a meteoric rise that few drivers ever experienced so early. And at first he delivered. Podiums, bold overtakes, and a confidence that suggested he was destined to stay. But Formula One can turn cruelly fast. In 2016, after a rough start in a collision with Vettel in his home race, Red Bull demoted Kvyat back to Toro Rosso, an unprecedented and very public fall from grace. It was a moment that could have broken a lesser driver. His confidence wavered, his results dipped, and for a time, it seemed like his story would end as another cautionary tale about Red Bull's ruthless driver program. Yet, what made Kvyat's journey remarkable was his quiet comeback. After being dropped entirely in 2017, he worked behind the scenes as a simulator driver for Ferrari, regaining his balance, his focus, and his love for driving. When Toro Rosso called him back in 2019, he returned not as a reckless torpedo some remembered, but as a more mature, measured racer. That season, he delivered an emotional podium in Germany, a small but powerful vindication of the work it took to rebuild himself. In the end, Daniil Kvyat's career was less about statistics and more about spirit. He lived through the full cycle of Formula One, from prodigy to exile to redemption, and handled it with grace. His story is a rare one in a sport that often forgets its fallen stars. Proof that even after the world moves on, a racer's fire can burn just as fiercely in silence. 39. Antonio Giovinazzi's journey through Formula One is one of persistence, patience, and understated flair, a career that never quite reached the spotlight, but always carried a sense of quiet capability. Born in Italy, he entered the sport at a time when his country had gone years without a full-time Formula One driver, and so, from the start, he carried not just his own ambition, but the weight of a nation's expectations. His debut in 2017 came unexpectedly, a last-minute call-up for Sauber to replace the unwell Pascal Wehrlein. With almost no preparation, Giovinazzi showed flashes of real promise, outpacing seasoned drivers in qualifying and reminding fans that Italy still produced racers with heart and speed. His full-time chance arrived in 2019 with Alfa Romeo, where he became teammate to the legendary Kimi Räikkönen. The comparison was daunting, racing beside a world champion, but Giovinazzi handled it with humility and growth. Over 3 seasons, he built a reputation as a driver who combined intelligence with finesse. He often found pace in difficult conditions, delivered strong qualifying performances, and occasionally outperformed his vastly more experienced teammate. But Alfa Romeo was rarely a car capable of fighting for points, and so his hard work was too often buried under the weight of circumstance. He became known not for podiums or drama, but for consistency, the kind of driver every team quietly values, even if the headlines don't. When his Formula One seat disappeared at the end of 2021, Giovinazzi didn't walk away defeated. He moved into Formula E endurance racing and continued to work with Ferrari as a reserve and simulator driver, a role that showed the trust and technical respect he had earned. Antonio Giovinazzi's time in F1 might not have rewritten record books, but reflected something essential about the sport. Not every racer's greatness lies in victories. Sometimes it's in the grace of surviving, improving, and representing your country with quiet pride. For Italian fans, Giovinazzi was more than just a driver. He was a bridge between generations, and a reminder that class doesn't always need noise to be felt. 38. Brendan Hartley's Formula One story is a study in perseverance and redemption. A New Zealander with quiet confidence and an engineer's mind, Hartley's journey to F1 was anything but straightforward. Early in his career, he was part of the Red Bull Junior team, a program known for producing stars, and for cutting them quickly. When his results dipped, Red Bull dropped him, and for a while, it seemed his Formula One dream had vanished for good. Yet rather than fade away, Hartley rebuilt himself piece by piece. He moved into endurance racing, where his discipline and precision found a natural home. With Porsche, he rose to the top, winning the World Endurance Championship twice, and the 24 Hours of Le Mans, achievements that demanded both speed and deep technical understanding. That second act opened the door back to Formula One. In 2017, Toro Rosso called him mid-season, giving him the chance he'd once lost. For Hartley, it was a moment of poetic symmetry, proof that persistence could turn rejection into renewal. The step from endurance to F1 was immense, and while he struggled at times with consistency and results, he brought with him the calm of a seasoned racer and the intellect of someone who understood the sport beyond raw pace. In a car that rarely had performance to shine, he still delivered moments of quiet quality, showing flashes of methodical control that had defined his career elsewhere. When his F1 stint ended after 2018, Hartley returned to endurance and Formula E, continuing to compete at a world-class level and helping develop cutting-edge hybrid systems. His name may not sit beside champions in the Formula One record books, but his story carries its own kind of triumph. Brendan Hartley proved that there is no single road to success in racing, that even after doors close, persistence, humility, and passion can bring you back to where you belong. 37. Nick Heidfeld's Formula One career is often remembered as one of the most consistent, technically gifted, and quietly dignified journeys the sport has seen. A driver who did almost everything right, except when a Grand Prix. The German, nicknamed Quick Nick, built his reputation on precision and calmness behind the wheel. By the time the 2010s began, Heidfeld was already a seasoned competitor, known for extracting the maximum from every car he touched. After steady years with Sauber and BMW, his driving reflected a kind of mechanical sympathy and control that engineers loved. He was never reckless, never wasteful, and always thinking several corners ahead. In 2011, he returned for what would become his final Formula One season with Renault, stepping in after Robert Kubica's tragic rally accident. It was a bittersweet opportunity, a chance to lead a team that had once been a powerhouse, but also a difficult environment shadowed by grief and instability. Even so, Heidfeld delivered strong performances, including a podium in Malaysia, a reminder that his talent had never faded. Yet internal politics and team restructuring soon ended his run prematurely. And quietly, one of the sport's most dependable careers reached its close. After leaving F1, Heidfeld transitioned seamlessly into endurance racing and then Formula E, where his technical finesse and adaptability again set him apart. He may never have stood atop a Formula One podium, but his 183 starts and 13 career podiums tell a story of quiet excellence. Nick Heidfeld's legacy isn't built on noise or glory. It's built on respect. The respect of engineers, teammates, and fans who saw in him a craftsman, someone who raced not for fame but for the art of precision. In a sport often obsessed with extremes, Heidfeld's calm consistency became its own form of brilliance. 36. Adrian Seudel's Formula One story is one of flashes of brilliance, moments of turbulence, and a career that often hovered tantalizingly close to greatness without ever fully seizing it. Born in Germany to a family of musicians, Seudel carried a calm precision that seemed almost at odds with the ferocity of the sport he chose. When he entered Formula One in 2007 with Spyker, a small team destined to evolve into Force India, he quickly became known for his fluid driving style and exceptional car control, especially in wet conditions. He wasn't just fast. He was smooth, thoughtful, and tactically aware, often outperforming the machinery at his disposal. Through the late 2000s and into the 2010s, Soottle grew with the team as it transformed into Force India, becoming one of its core figures. His 2009 and 2011 seasons, in particular, showed what he was capable of: near-podium finishes, daring battles with faster cars, and a quiet reputation among engineers as one of the grid's most technically astute drivers. But his time in F1 wasn't without turbulence. An off-track altercation in 2011 led to a hiatus from the sport, halting his momentum just as Force India began to rise. When he returned in 2013, older and more composed, he approached racing with maturity and restraint, though the spark of opportunity had dimmed slightly. A final season with Sauber in 2014 marked the end of his F1 journey. Not in triumph, but with quiet professionalism. Looking back, Adrian Sootle's career is one of near misses and quiet competence. He was the kind of driver who could, on the right day, embarrass teams with double the budget, yet fate and timing never quite aligned. Off track, he carried himself with a sense of grace, introspection, and discipline that reflected his musical upbringing. His name may not stand among world champions, but to those who watch closely, Soottle embodied something rare in Formula One: the elegance of control and the artistry of a driver who made speed look effortless. 35. Timo Glock's Formula One career was defined by perseverance, adaptability, and a quiet strength that carried him through both triumph and heartbreak. The German driver's journey through the sport had an almost cinematic rhythm, from substitute beginnings to factory seats, from podium celebrations to backmarker battles. When the 2010s began, Glock was already known as a fighter, a driver who never stopped pushing, even when the odds or the machinery weren't in his favor. After showing promise with Toyota before the team's exit from F1, Glock joined the newly formed Virgin Racing team in 2010, which later became Marussia. It was a bold choice, leaving the comfort of a manufacturer team for a small startup built on hope and innovation. The cars were difficult, underpowered, and unreliable, but Glock carried himself with professionalism and quiet optimism, becoming a pillar of experience in a team filled with rookies and dreamers. He extracted more from those cars than anyone reasonably could, often battling with drivers in faster machines and still finding small victories in finishing races where others failed. For all his work ethic, though, Glock's Formula One story is forever linked to one unforgettable moment: the final laps of the 2008 Brazilian Grand Prix, when his slowing Toyota was passed by Lewis Hamilton in the last corners, handing Hamilton his first world championship. It was a twist of fate that unfairly made Glock a villain to some fans, though he had done nothing wrong. He was simply caught out on slick tires in the rain. Over time, the sport remembered him for what he truly was: a driver of integrity, consistency, and depth. After F1, Glock thrived in DTM, rediscovering success and joy behind the wheel. His career stands as a reminder that greatness in motorsport isn't only written in wins. Sometimes it's written in endurance, loyalty, and the grace with which you weather the storm. 34. Vitaly Petrov's story in Formula One is one of first, resilience, and a quiet pride of man who opened new doors for his country. When he joined Renault in 2010, he made history as the first Russian driver ever to race in Formula One, a symbolic moment that carried far more weight than the numbers on the timing screens. Coming from Viborg, with none of the deep motorsport infrastructure enjoyed by most Western European drivers, Petrov's path was unconventional and hard-won. Yet, once he arrived, he proved he belonged. Aggressive, fearless, and unpredictable at times, he brought a raw edge to the grid that made him both entertaining and respected. His rookie season was filled with learning curves and flashes of genuine pace, but 2011 became his defining year. Driving alongside Nick Heidfeld for Lotus Renault GP, Petrov stunned the paddock at the Australian Grand Prix by finishing on the podium, third place in a car that wasn't expected to challenge the front. That result was more than a personal victory. It was a breakthrough moment for Russian motorsport, a sign that the country could produce world-class drivers. Throughout that season, Petrov grew more confident, refining his aggression into control and showing glimpses of the racer he was becoming. By 2012, however, opportunities grew thin. He joined Caterham, a backmarker team fighting for survival, and while the results were modest, his professionalism never wavered. When he stepped out of Formula One at the end of that year, he did so with his head high, Vitaly Petrov had come from a part of the world that wasn't supposed to produce Formula One drivers, yet he had not only reached the grid, but stood on the podium among champions. His career may not have been long, but its impact was lasting, paving the way for the likes of Daniil Kvyat and Sergei Sirkin, and proving that courage and opportunity can sometimes meet, even in the most unlikely places. 33. Stoffel Vandoorne's journey through Formula One is a story of brilliance, frustration, and quiet redemption. The tale of the driver who had all the talent in the world but arrived at exactly the wrong moment. A Belgian with a razor-sharp racing mind and silky precision behind the wheel, Vandoorne's rise to the junior ranks was nothing short of stellar. He dominated GP2, now Formula 2, in 2015, winning with a calm authority that made him look like a future world champion. McLaren saw the same promise and groomed him as their next star, the heir apparent to the team's proud lineage of greats. Everything seemed perfectly aligned for success. But when Vandoorne finally stepped into a full-time seat in 2017, he found himself caught in one of McLaren's darkest eras. The Honda engine partnership was faltering, the car was slow and unreliable, and the team was desperate for answers. Next to him sat Fernando Alonso, one of the sport's most complete and relentless competitors. It was a near-impossible environment for a rookie to flourish in. Still, Vandoorne carried himself with professionalism and humility, often masking his disappointment behind calm composure. His technical feedback was sharp, his work ethic admired, but the results on paper never matched the potential that had once made him Europe's brightest young talent. By 2019, McLaren had moved on, and Vandoorne's Formula One dream seemed over, but his story was far from finished. He transitioned to Formula E, where the balance between machinery and driver mattered more, and there, his talent resurfaced. With Mercedes, he became a race winner and eventually a world champion, reminding everyone of the skill that Formula One's chaos had overshadowed. Stoffel Vandoorne's career stands as a bittersweet parable of timing, proof that in Formula One, even great drivers can be swallowed by circumstance. Yet, in his grace, adaptability, and refusal to fade, he showed a deeper kind of success, one built not on luck, but on resilience. 32. Robert Kubica's story in Formula One is one of extraordinary talent, tragedy, and almost mythic comeback that captured the human heart of the sport. Born in Krakow, Poland, he grew up far from Formula One's traditional power centers, yet his gift for precision, bravery, and feel for the car was undeniable from the beginning. When he made his debut with BMW Sauber in 2006, it didn't take long for the paddock to realize they were watching something rare. He was analytical yet fearless, a driver who could dance at the edge of control and still find more time in the car than seemed possible. His first win at the 2008 Canadian Grand Prix was more than just a victory. It was fulfillment of a promise, a moment that seemed to announce the arrival of a future world champion. But fate had other plans. In early 2011, just as Kubica was preparing to lead Renault's charge, he suffered a devastating rally accident in Italy that nearly cost him his right arm. The injuries were so severe that doctors doubted he would ever race again, let alone return to the superhuman precision of Formula One. Yet what followed was one of the most determined and inspiring recoveries in modern sport. Through years of rehabilitation, endless pain, and quiet perseverance, Kubica refused to let go of his dream. He worked his way back through lower categories, testing and simulator work, until, against all odds, he returned to Formula One with Williams in 2019, 8 years after his last Grand Prix. The car he came back and was painfully uncompetitive, but that didn't matter. His very presence on the grid was a victory, not of machinery, but of willpower. When he scored a point in Germany that year, it was symbolic, not for its numerical value, but for what it represented. The spirit of a man who had every reason to stop, but never did. Robert Kubica's name may not sit among multiple world champions, but his story transcends them. He reminded the world that Formula One isn't only about speed. It's about resilience, courage, and a relentless pursuit of a dream, even when your body and fate have tried to take it away. 31. Heikki Kovalainen's Formula One story is one of promise, humility, and quiet perseverance, a career that began with a glow of expectation and ended with the grace of acceptance. Born in Finland, a country known for producing drivers of cold precision and fierce control, Kovalainen arrived in Formula One with a weight of potential on his shoulders. When he debuted with Renault in 2007, he impressed almost immediately. Smooth, composed, and intelligent in the car, with flashes of the same calm aggression that had made his compatriots legends. That rookie year earned him not only respect, but a place alongside Lewis Hamilton at McLaren in 2008, a seat that many dreamed of and one that carried both opportunity and immense pressure. His time at McLaren showcased the fine margins that define Formula One careers. Kovalainen was fast enough to take a memorable victory at the 2008 Hungarian Grand Prix, but the partnership also revealed the brutal truth of elite racing. Sometimes, talent meets a teammate whose brilliance reshapes the sport. Against Hamilton, Kovalainen's confidence dimmed, and his consistency faltered. Still, he never lost his professionalism. He handled the scrutiny with quiet dignity, earning a reputation as a true team player, a driver more concerned with doing the job right than chasing headlines. When he moved to the new Lotus, later Caterham, team in 2010, the story shifted from fighting for podiums to helping a team simply survive. Kovalainen threw himself into that role with humility and care, guiding young engineers, mentoring rookies, and extracting the most from uncompetitive machinery. Even when the wins and points were gone, his work ethic and optimism never left him. After leaving Formula One, he continued racing in Japan, finding success and joy away from the noise of the global spotlight. Heikki Kovalainen's career may not have fulfilled every early prediction, but it became something deeper, a portrait of quiet resilience, the rare grace of a man who understood that success in Formula One isn't only about victory, but about how you carry yourself when the world stops watching. 30. Esteban Gutierrez's Formula One journey is a story of quiet ambition, hard lessons, and a delicate balance between talent and timing. Born in Monterrey, Mexico, Gutierrez rose through the junior ranks with the kind of polished consistency that made him stand out early. He was fast, composed, and methodical, a driver who seemed destined to follow in the footsteps of his countryman Sergio Perez. Backed by strong support from Sauber and Ferrari's development programs, he made his Formula One debut with Sauber in 2013, stepping into a world that demanded more than just speed. It required adaptability, mental toughness, and a touch of luck that often defines a career. That first season was tough. The Sauber car was unpredictable, and Gutierrez spent much of the year learning the brutal pace of Formula One. But there were flashes of promise, none brighter than a stunning drive at Suzuka, where he finished 7th and scored his first championship points. It was a race that briefly silenced doubt and reminded everyone that beneath his calm demeanor was a racer capable of brilliance. Still, in a sport where impressions are fleeting, one standout drive wasn't enough to secure permanence. His second season brought more challenges and progress, and by 2015 he was out of a full-time seat, though Ferrari, recognizing his technical depth, brought him in as a reserve and simulator driver. When he returned to grid with Haas in 2016, it was with renewed determination but similar frustrations. The team's early promise faded as the year went on, and despite steady performances, Gutierrez ended the season without scoring points, a statistic that never told a full story of how hard he worked to keep the car competitive. After Formula One, he didn't disappear. He reinvented himself again, joining Formula E and later contributing as a development driver for Mercedes' F1 program. Esteban Gutierrez's career may not have been adorned with podiums or titles, but it reflected a different kind of strength. The endurance to keep learning, to adapt, and to carry himself with quiet dignity in a sport that so easily forgets its quieter talents. 29. Marcus Ericsson's Formula One career is a story of quiet evolution, of a driver who arrived with promise, endured years in the wilderness, and eventually found his redemption far beyond the paddock spotlight. Born in Sweden, Ericsson came to Formula One in 2014 as part of the wave of young talents joining new teams during a turbulent period in the sport history. He started with Caterham, a team struggling for survival, where just finishing races felt like victory. The car was slow, heavy, and unpredictable, but even in those difficult weekends, Ericsson showed flashes of composure and grit. His debut season was less about points and more about perseverance, learning how to survive in a sport that rarely forgives inexperience or mediocrity. When Caterham folded, Ericsson moved to Sauber, where he found stability and a chance to grow. Over the next 4 seasons, he became a reliable and respected part of the team, not spectacular, but solid, methodical, and technically sharp. While Sauber's cars often lacked competitiveness, Ericsson developed a reputation for consistency under pressure and for bringing the car home when others faltered. He quietly matured into a leader, helping guide a team through financial troubles and constant changes in management. Though often overshadowed by flashier rookies and faster machinery, he never complained. He just worked. That humility, that sense of persistence, defined him more than any single race result could. When his Formula One chapter closed after 2018, Ericsson did something that many in his position couldn't. He reinvented himself. Moving to IndyCar, he rebuilt his career from the ground up and, in 2022, won the prestigious Indianapolis 500, a triumph that felt like poetic justice. It wasn't just a race win. It was validation, proof that the quiet worker from F1's midfield had always had champion-level talent. Marcus Ericsson's journey is a reminder that some careers bloom late, that success isn't about where you start, but about the patience to keep going when no one is watching and the belief that your moment will come. 28. Jolyon Palmer's Formula One story is one of persistence, intellect, and the bittersweet reality of a driver who reached the sport's highest stage but never quite found the machinery or rhythm to stay there. Born into a racing family, his father, Jonathan Palmer, was also a Formula One driver. Jolyon grew up with both the heritage and the hunger to make his own mark. His rise through the ranks was patient rather than meteoric. He earned his way forward through years of graft, culminating in a commanding GP2 championship win in 2014. That title, achieved through consistency and racercraft rather than raw aggression, announced him as a thinker's driver, calculated, composed, and mature behind the wheel. Palmer made his full-time Formula One debut with Renault in 2016, during a period of deep transition for the team. The car was heavy, unreliable, and nowhere near competitive, but Palmer approached the challenge with diligence. He worked closely with engineers, learned quickly, and slowly began to find comfort in the rhythm of the sport. His performances improved over the year, and by the end of his rookie season, he'd begun to show flashes of precision that had defined his junior career, highlighted by a well-earned point in Malaysia. But Formula One can be brutally unforgiving to those learning in the midfield. In 2017, as Renault's ambitions outgrew its resources, Palmer found himself under immense pressure, especially alongside the highly rated Nico Hülkenberg. Despite moments of resilience, like a strong drive to sixth in Singapore, inconsistency and circumstance combined to bring his time in F1 to an early close. Yet, what makes Palmer's story compelling is what came after. Instead of fading from the sport, he transformed his experience into insight, becoming one of Formula One's most respected analysts and commentators. His sharp understanding of race dynamics, strategy, and driver psychology turned him into a trusted voice for fans around the world. In a way, Jolyon Palmer's legacy extends further through his words and his laps. His career reminds us that success in Formula One isn't only found on the podium. Sometimes, it's in the clarity and passion with which you share the sport once the helmet comes off. 27. Paul di Resta's story in Formula One is one of quiet professionalism, adaptability, and the rare kind of maturity that often goes unnoticed in a world obsessed with glamour and speed. Born in Scotland, di Resta came into Formula One through an unconventional route. Not straight from the junior single-seater ladder, but from the German DTM Touring Car Series, where he became champion in 2010. His calm consistency and technical understanding impressed Mercedes and Force India, and in 2011, he finally earned his place on the grid. He wasn't the loudest or most flamboyant newcomer, but his driving spoke for itself, smooth, intelligent, and reliable. Over his 3 full seasons with Force India, di Resta built a reputation as one of the most dependable midfield drivers of the early 2010s. He scored points regularly, often outperforming his machinery and delivering the kind of quiet, calculated performances that kept his team in contention for valuable constructors' positions. There were flashes of brilliance, notably in 2012, when he finished 4th in Singapore after a near-perfect race, but also frustration of being in cars that could never quite reach the front. Still, di Resta's ability to read races, conserve tires, and provide detailed technical feedback made him a driver teams trusted, even if the spotlight rarely found him. After his F1 seat ended in 2013, he returned to DTM, where his natural precision behind the wheel once again shone. Yet his link to Formula One never truly faded. In 2017, in one of the sport's most unexpected moments, he was called up at the last minute to replace Felipe Massa at Williams for the Hungarian Grand Prix, having not driven a Formula One car in years. Without any real preparation, he qualified within reach of the midfield and handled the race with remarkable composure, earning respect across the paddock for his professionalism. Later, he transitioned into broadcasting, becoming a clear, articulate voice on Formula One coverage. The same calm intelligence he showed as a driver now evident in his commentary. Paul di Resta's Formula One career might not have brought podiums or championships, but embodied something rarer: quiet competence and grace under pressure. He was the kind of driver every team needs: smart, steady, and utterly dependable. And in a sport often dominated by ego, he stood out for his humility and integrity. 26. Lance Stroll's Formula One story is one of persistence, pressure, and a steady evolution under a spotlight that has never stopped questioning him. Born in Montreal, Canada, into a family deeply invested in motorsport, Stroll's path to Formula One was accelerated and, for some, controversial. His father, billionaire businessman Lawrence Stroll, helped secure the resources and backing that propelled his son to the junior categories and ultimately into a Formula One seat with Williams in 2017. For critics, he was the embodiment of the paid driver label. But from the moment he stepped onto the grid, Lance seemed determined to prove that money might open the door, but talent decides how long you stay inside. His rookie season began roughly, marked by crashes and inconsistency, but by mid-year, he began to find his footing. The turning point came in Baku, where he delivered a mature, composed drive to claim a podium finish, third place, at just 18 years old, making him one of the youngest podium finishers in Formula One history. That result wasn't luck. It was control under chaos, a glimpse of genuine racercraft beneath the noise of criticism. In the seasons that followed, Stroll grew steadily, even if quietly. His move to Racing Point, later Aston Martin, a team owned by his father, gave him stability and a long-term home. There, he evolved from a raw prospect into a capable, confident driver, particularly in wet conditions, where his touch and intuition often shine. While the narrative around him has always been divided, part skepticism, part admiration, Stroll's performances have slowly spoken for themselves. He scored multiple podiums, earned a pole position in a treacherous wet qualifying session in Turkey 2020, and has held his own against respected teammates. He may not have the polish of a future champion, but his resilience and improvement in the face of relentless scrutiny show a deeper strength. Lance Stroll's journey reminds us that Formula One careers are not defined solely by beginnings. They're defined by what you build when the world doubts you. Beneath the privilege lies persistence, and in that he's proven he's more than just his surname. 25. Alexander Albon's story in Formula One is one of humility, second chances, and quiet brilliance beneath immense pressure. Born in London to a Thai mother and a British father, Albon's path to the pinnacle of motorsport was anything but easy. He came through the junior ranks without the financial cushion many of his rivals enjoyed, often fighting to keep his racing career alive. His talent was undeniable, quick, precise, and adaptable, but his progress was slow, delayed by funding struggles and moments when his dreams seemed to hang by a thread. Yet, like all true racers, he refused to let go. That persistence paid off in 2019, when Toro Rosso handed him a seat. What followed was one of the most unexpectedly emotional stories of the modern F1 era. Albon's rookie performances were confident and composed, marked by a blend of aggression and respect that caught Red Bull's attention. Midway through that same season, he was promoted to the senior team, a massive leap for a driver still finding his rhythm. The step-up came with both opportunity and pressure, replacing Pierre Gasly, partnering Max Verstappen, and carrying the expectations of one of Formula One's most scrutinized seats. For moments, he shone bold overtakes, quiet consistency, and a calm temperament that stood out amid chaos. But the pressure of Red Bull's ruthless environment soon took its toll. The car was sharp-edged, difficult to tame, and Verstappen's shadow loomed large. Albon's confidence wavered, and by the end of 2020, he was out of a race seat. Another young talent burned by the Red Bull machine. Yet what makes Albon's story remarkable is how he came back. After a year on the sidelines, he returned in 2022 with Williams, a team rebuilding, much like him. They're freed from the suffocating expectations. He rediscovered the joy of driving. His performances were outstanding, calm, tactical, and at times heroic, dragging the car to results that seemed impossible. The paddock's respect followed quickly, not because he shouted for it, but because he earned it. Alexander Albon's Formula One career is still being written, but its heart is already clear, a story about resilience, quiet strength, and the grace to rise again after the world moves on. 24. Jean-Eric Vergne's Formula One journey is one of quiet potential, tough timing, and ultimate reinvention. The kind of story that reminds you how thin the line is between success and obscurity in the sport. Born in France, Vergne came up to the Red Bull Junior team, one of the most ruthless yet rewarding development programs in motorsport. He arrived in Formula One in 2012 with Toro Rosso, young, hungry, and fearless. His driving style was aggressive but calculated, and his technical understanding quickly earned the respect of engineers. In many ways, he was a prototype of the modern F1 driver, sharp on data, cool under pressure, and capable of brilliance on his day. But like so many within Red Bull's system, timing became his greatest adversary. For 3 seasons with Toro Rosso, Vergne showed flashes of real class, wet weather heroics, precise race crafting, calm under chaos. He often matched or even outperformed his teammates, including Daniel Ricciardo. But when Red Bull needed to promote a driver to its top team, the seat went to Ricciardo. It was a hard blow, and though Vergne continued to deliver consistent performances in the midfield, the machinery and politics around him conspired against a longer career. By the end of 2014, he found himself without a drive, another promising talent caught in the revolving door of Red Bull's youth system. Yet, what followed turned his story from disappointment into quiet triumph. Vergne reinvented himself in Formula E, where his maturity and precision found a home perfectly suited to his style. He became a 2-time Formula E world champion, the first driver ever to achieve that, and won the series' defining figures. In the electric paddock, he finally became what he'd always threatened to be, a leader, a thinker, and a complete driver. Jean-Eric Vergne's career stands as a lesson that Formula One isn't the only measure of greatness. Sometimes, the ones who slip through its cracks go on to define the future elsewhere, proving that the racer's spirit doesn't end when the lights go out. It just finds a new track to shine on. 23. Pastor Maldonado's story in Formula One is one of paradox, a tale of brilliance and chaos, of talent that dazzled one weekend and self-destruction the next. Born in Venezuela, he came to Formula One as both a product of relentless drive and the powerful political backing of his country's state oil company, PDVSA. That combination made him a lightning rod for controversy even before he ever sat in a Williams car. Yet beneath the headlines and criticism was a driver of genuine speed, fearless, aggressive, and, when everything aligned, utterly untouchable. His 2012 Spanish Grand Prix victory stands as one of the most astonishing underdog wins in modern Formula One history, the kind of moment that reminds you why people fall in love with this sport. That day in Barcelona, Maldonado drove like a man possessed. Against the mighty Ferrari of Fernando Alonso and the relentless pace of Kimi Räikkönen, he was calm, flawless, and fast, a perfect race that defied logic and expectation. It was Williams' first win in 8 years, and for a brief moment, Pastor Maldonado became a national hero and a symbol of pure, unfiltered talent. But that moment would also define him in another way, because what followed never quite matched it. His aggression, once thrilling, often tipped into recklessness. Collisions, penalties, and near misses began to overshadow his flashes of brilliance. He became known less for his speed than for his unpredictability. A driver who could either deliver genius or chaos, sometimes within the same race. When he moved to Lotus in 2014, hopes of rediscovery lingered, but the pattern continued. Moment of pace buried under inconsistency. By the end of 2015, as financial and political tides shifted, his Formula One chapter quietly closed. Yet, despite the criticism, Maldonado remains one of the sport's most fascinating characters. His victory in Spain wasn't luck. It was proof of raw ability few ever reach. He lived and raced without fear, in an era where perfection was demanded but risk still defined the greats. Pastor Maldonado may have been unpredictable, but he was never forgettable. And in Formula One, that's its own kind of immortality. 22. Kamui Kobayashi's Formula One story is one of heart audacity and a kind of fearless driving that reminded fans why they fell in love with the sport in the first place. Born in Japan, Kobayashi burst onto the F1 scene in 2009 with Toyota, and from the moment he arrived, he raced like a man who had nothing to lose. His debut performances were electric, lunging overtakes, impossible late-braking moves, and a natural instinct for wheel-to-wheel combat that instantly made him a fan favorite. At a time when Formula One risked becoming too calculated, Kobayashi brought back a sense of danger, of joy, of pure racing spirit. When Toyota withdrew from F1, Sauber gave him a lifeline, and it was there that Kobayashi truly came into his own. Between 2010 and 2012, he became the beating heart of the midfield, aggressive yet respectful, always ready to turn a dull race into a spectacle. His driving at Suzuka, in front of his home crowd, became the stuff of legend. In 2012, he finally claimed his first and only podium there, finishing third after fending off attacks from faster cars with sheer will and precision. The image of Kobayashi standing on the podium, overwhelmed by emotion as Japanese fans waved flags and cried in the stands, remains one of the most human moments of that era. It wasn't just a result. It was a love letter between a driver and his country. Yet, like many cult heroes, his career was as fragile as it was beloved. By 2013, the sponsorship landscape shifted and he lost his seat, another victim of Formula One's brutal economics. He returned briefly with Caterham in 2014, but by then the machinery couldn't match his fire. Still, Kobayashi's legacy endures far beyond the statistics. He reminded the world that racing could still be about courage, creativity, and passion. After F1, he became a force in endurance racing, including victory at Le Mans with Toyota, closing the circle he had opened years before. Kamui Kobayashi's story isn't about dominance. It's about heart. He was a fighter in the midfield who drove like he was chasing something more than points. He was chasing joy. 21. Kevin Magnussen's story in Formula One is one of resilience, raw talent, and unpolished edge that has made him one of the sport's most authentic characters. Born in Denmark, he carried the legacy of his father, Jan Magnussen, a former F1 driver, but from his earliest races, it was clear Kevin was determined to carve his own path. His rise to the junior ranks was fast and fierce. He was quick, fearless, and uncompromising, traits that caught McLaren's attention and earned him a Formula One debut in 2014. On that first day, he delivered something remarkable, a podium finish in Australia, becoming the first Danish driver ever to stand on an F1 podium and the first rookie to do so on debut in nearly 2 decades. It felt like the start of something huge. But Formula One rarely follows a script. After that dream debut, McLaren's form declined, and the team's focus shifted toward Fernando Alonso's return. Magnussen was dropped to a reserve role after just 1 full season, a brutal reminder how little patience the sport allows its young drivers. Still, he refused to fade. He returned with Renault in 2016, showing flashes of his old fire, before finding his true home with Haas, a team that embraced his fighting spirit and let him be unapologetically himself. There, he became known for his hard, elbows-out racing, his brutal honesty on the radio, and his ability to drag the car into positions it didn't belong. When Haas let him go after 2020, it seemed his F1 chapter had ended. Yet, as always, Kevin's story had another twist. In 2022, when Haas suddenly needed a driver, just weeks before the season, Magnussen was called back. In his very first race back, he finished 5th, a comeback worthy of a Hollywood script. Later that year, he claimed his first pole position in Brazil, a moment of vindication that felt years overdue. Kevin Magnussen's career has been defined by grit more than glamour. He's the fighter who never stays down, the racer who never apologizes for being raw, passionate, and real. In a sport often polished perfection, Magnussen has always been something better, human. 20. Felipe Massa's Formula One story is one of courage, emotion, and resilience, a career that embodied the full spectrum of what it means to be a racer. Born in Sao Paulo, Brazil, Massa grew up idolizing Ayrton Senna, And like his hero, he carried the spirit of Brazilian racing in everything he did. Fiery passion, deep humility, and an unbreakable will. When he first arrived in Formula One with Sauber in 2002, he was fast but wild, a young driver overflowing with talent but still learning control. Ferrari saw that raw potential and took him under their wing, a partnership that would define his career and lead him to within a heartbeat of immortality. Massa's peak came in 2008, a season etched forever into the sport's memory. Driving for Ferrari, he fought Lewis Hamilton in one of the most dramatic title battles of all time, winning 6 races, and reaching the final round in Brazil still in contention. On that rainy afternoon at Interlagos, in front of a nation's eyes, Massa crossed the finish line believing he had become world champion, only for Hamilton to snatch the title back in the final corner. What could have been heartbreak for others, he handled with unmatched grace. Standing on the podium, tears in his eyes, he saluted the crowd, the car, and the sport itself. In that moment, he showed the world that true greatness isn't only measured in victory, but in dignity. 19. Mark Webber's story in Formula One is one of grit, honesty, and the kind of hard-earned success that makes legends out of ordinary men. Born in Queanbeyan in Australia, far from the glittering circuits of Europe, Webber's path to Formula One was carved through sheer willpower and relentless work. He didn't come from money or influence, only determination. By the time he reached F1 in 2002, he was already known for his toughness and commitment, the kind of driver who could wrestle a bad car into good results. His debut for Minardi, where he scored points on home soil in Melbourne, was a fairy tale beginning for a driver whose career would be defined by fighting uphill battles. It was with Red Bull Racing, though, that Webber's name became etched into the modern era of the sport. When the team rose from underdog to powerhouse in the late 2000s, he became one of its pillars, fast, disciplined, and utterly fearless. His first win at the 2009 German Grand Prix was a culmination of years of struggle and self-belief, and from there, he became a consistent contender, racking up 9 victories and 42 podiums. Yet Webber's time at Red Bull was never smooth sailing. Sharing a garage with the young phenom Sebastian Vettel turned his career into both a partnership and a rivalry, marked by flashes of tension and moments of quiet defiance. The multi-21 saga in Malaysia 2013, when Vettel ignored team orders and overtook him, became symbolic of their complicated dynamic. Through it all, Webber remained unapologetically himself, blunt, proud, and fiercely principled. 18. Esteban Ocon's story in Formula One is one of grit, discipline, and the quiet fire of a man who had to fight for everything he earned. Born in Normandy, France, to a working-class family, Ocon's road to Formula One was anything but easy. His parents sold their house and lived in a caravan so they could afford to keep him racing, a sacrifice that shaped him into one of the most determined competitors of his generation. Every lap, every race, every contract he signed has carried the weight of that struggle. He didn't arrive in F1 through privilege or connections. He arrived through raw talent and relentless effort. Ocon made his debut in 2016 with Manor before joining Force India the following year, and it didn't take long for him to make an impression. He combined raw speed with a kind of calculating precision that made him both fast and dependable. In his first full season, he scored points consistently and finished nearly every race, a remarkable feat for someone still learning the intricacies of Formula One. But perhaps what defined him most in those early years was his refusal to be intimidated. Racing alongside Sergio Perez, he showed no hesitation in going wheel to wheel with his more experienced teammate, even when it led to on-track clashes. That stubborn edge, sometimes divisive, was also what made him formidable. After losing his seat in 2019 due to team politics and financial backing, Ocon could easily have faded from the sport's memory, but he didn't. He stayed sharp as Mercedes' reserve driver, and when Renault, later Alpine, brought him back in 2020, he repaid their faith with maturity and composure. Then in 2021 came his defining moment, a stunning victory at the Hungarian Grand Prix. In a race of chaos and giants falling, Ocon kept his head, defended like a lion against Sebastian Vettel, and claimed his first Formula One win, a triumph not just of skill but of perseverance. 17. George Russell's story in Formula One is one of ambition, composure, and the quiet confidence of a man who always believed he belonged among the best. Born in King's Lynn, England, Russell grew up with a laser-focused determination that set him apart even in his early karting days. He wasn't from wealth or privilege, but from discipline and obsession, the kind of kid who studied telemetry data like it was scripture and treated every lap as a lesson. His rise through the junior categories was methodical, not meteoric, a steady climb built on brains as much as bravery. When he won the GP3 and Formula 2 championships back-to-back, it wasn't by accident, it was a statement. Russell's Formula One debut with Williams in 2019 was both a blessing and a test of endurance. The team was at its lowest point, the car painfully slow, and most weekends were spent fighting at the back of the field. Yet Russell's professionalism never wavered. He extracted speed from a car that had none, out-qualified his teammates every single time, and impressed engineers with his precision and feedback. In those years of obscurity, he built something vital: respect. His consistency and poise turned him from a promising rookie into a future team leader, and everyone in the paddock could see it coming. Then came Bahrain 2020, the race that changed everything. Called up to substitute for Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes after a positive COVID test, Russell finally had the machinery to match his ability. He led the race with calm brilliance, dominating veterans and showing that he wasn't just talented, he was elite. A pit stop error robbed him of a likely victory, but in that heartbreak came validation. Mercedes and the world had seen what he could do. When he officially joined the team in 2022, he wasted no time proving he belonged, outscoring Hamilton over the season and earning his first Grand Prix win in Brazil. 16. Pierre Gasly's Formula One story is one of heartbreak, redemption, and the quiet transformation of a young driver who refused to be defined by failure. Born in Rouen, France, Gasly's path to F1 followed the classic Red Bull trajectory: fast, fearless, and full of promise. After dominating in junior formulas and winning the GP2 championship in 2016, he joined Toro Rosso, where his raw pace and racercraft quickly marked him as a future star. He was fast, precise, and mentally sharp, a student of the sport who balanced aggression with control. Red Bull took notice, and in 2019, he was promoted to the senior team alongside Max Verstappen. That promotion, however, would become one of the hardest chapters of his life. The Red Bull car was notoriously difficult to handle, the pressure immense, and the comparisons to Verstappen relentless. A few rough weekends turned into a storm of criticism, and by mid-season, he was demoted back to Toro Rosso, a public and painful fall from grace. Yet, instead of letting it break him, Gasly turned that humiliation into fuel. He came back stronger, calmer, and more mature. The redemption arc came in Monza 2020, where, in one of Formula One's most emotional moments, he claimed a stunning victory for AlphaTauri. Against all odds, he outlasted the chaos, defended with ice-cold precision, and crossed the line screaming with disbelief. For the first time since 1996, a French driver had won a Grand Prix, and Gasly had done it not with privilege or politics, but with heart. 15. Lando Norris's story in Formula One is one of youthful brilliance, authenticity, and evolution. A driver who arrived as a prodigy and has grown into one of the sport's most complete modern competitors. Born in Bristol, England, Norris was marked for greatness from the beginning. His rise through the junior categories was a masterclass in precision and speed. He was fast, fearless, and relentlessly consistent, the kind of talent that doesn't just win races, but changes how people look at the future of the sport. When McLaren signed him as a full-time driver in 2019, they weren't just bringing in a rookie. They were betting on the next generation. From his debut, Norris showed something rare: raw pace combined with an easy, unfiltered personality that instantly connected with fans. Behind the wheel, he was clinical, quick in qualifying, clever in battle, and unafraid to push the limits. Off the track, his humor and openness made him one of the most relatable faces Formula One had ever seen. But beneath the charm was a fierce competitor. Through McLaren's rebuilding years, Norris matured into the emotional backbone of the team. He handled disappointment with grace, learned from every missed opportunity, and turned consistency into his greatest strength. By 2021, when he scored his first pole position in Russia, and came agonizingly close to his first victory. The world saw not just a fast driver, but a composed, intelligent racer capable of leading a team to glory. 14. Romain Grosjean's story in Formula One is one of redemption, resilience, and a powerful reminder that courage comes in many forms. Born in Geneva, Switzerland, Grosjean's early years in F1 were fast, fiery, and sometimes chaotic. When he first entered the sport in 2009 with Renault, his raw speed was undeniable, but so were the rough edges. After losing his seat, he went back to the junior ranks, rebuilt himself from the ground up, and returned in 2012 as a more mature, sharper version of the driver he once was. What followed was a career defined by transformation, from a once impulsive talent to one of the paddock's most complete and respected competitors. With Lotus, Grosjean hit his stride. He combined instinctive pace with deep racercraft, scoring multiple podiums and often battling near the front against far better funded teams. His driving was fluid, intelligent, and deeply emotional. You could feel how much he cared in every lap. But his later years with Haas revealed another side to him: endurance in uncompetitive machinery. He became the steady heart of a small team trying to survive among giants, mentoring younger teammates and carrying the burden of a car that could rarely show his true ability. Then came November 2020, the moment that redefined his life. At the Bahrain Grand Prix, Grosjean's car pierced through a barrier and exploded in flames, a crash so violent it seemed unimaginable anyone could survive. Yet, through instinct, strength, and sheer willpower, he escaped the inferno with his life, climbing from the wreckage as the world watched in disbelief. The burns on his hands became a symbol, not of tragedy, but of triumph. He became the man who walked through fire, both literally and figuratively. 13. Carlos Sainz Jr.'s story in Formula One is one of patience, intelligence, and steady evolution, a driver who built his legacy not through fireworks, but through discipline and depth. Born in Madrid to rally legend Carlos Sainz Sr., he carried the weight of expectation from the moment he put on a helmet. But from the start, Sainz made it clear he wasn't here to inherit his father's name. He was here to create his own. His rise through the junior ranks was fueled by methodical growth and raw competitiveness, traits that caught Red Bull's eye and earned him a seat with Toro Rosso in 2015. Arriving alongside Max Verstappen, Sainz immediately found himself in one of the toughest comparisons imaginable. Yet he held his own, often matching Verstappen for a pace and maturity, even if recognition came slower. Over the following years, Sainz became the definition of a complete driver, adaptable, consistent, and quietly relentless. At Renault and later McLaren, he emerged as a team leader, not just with his speed, but with his emotional intelligence. At McLaren, he became the cornerstone of the team's resurgence, combining technical sharpness with humility and teamwork. His podiums in 2019 and 2020 weren't miracles. They were the product of relentless craft. Sainz had learned to turn opportunity into outcome, and his reputation as one of F1's most dependable and underrated drivers grew with every race. When Ferrari signed him in 2021, some doubted whether he could thrive alongside Charles Leclerc, one of the sport's most naturally gifted talents. But Sainz adapted, studied, and delivered. He brought balance to Ferrari's volatility, often outscoring Leclerc in his first season and cementing his place as more than just a supporting act. His maiden victory at Silverstone in 2022 was a culmination of everything that defines him: patience, precision, and the ability to stay composed when chaos erupts around him. 12. Charles Leclerc's story in Formula One is one of brilliance, tragedy, and the quiet burden of greatness. Born in Monte Carlo, Monaco, Leclerc seemed destined for speed. A child who grew up watching the roar of Formula One cars echo through the same streets he'd one day conquer. But his rise was anything but privileged. Behind the polished exterior was a journey marked by sacrifice, loss, and relentless determination. He lost two of the most important figures in his life: his godfather, Jules Bianchi, the driver who mentored him and whose death reshaped Formula One's safety forever, and his father, Hervé Leclerc, who passed away just days before Charles won in Formula 2. Those moments forged him. They didn't harden him, they deepened him. By the time he arrived in Formula One in 2018 with Sauber, he wasn't just fast, he was emotionally fearless. From the very beginning, Leclerc stood out as something rare, a driver who combined surgical precision with raw, instinctive speed. His rookie year was a revelation. He dragged the Sauber into positions it had no business being in, earning him a call-up to Ferrari for 2019. There, under the blinding pressure of the red suit, he announced himself to the world. Pole positions came quickly, and so did victories. First at Spa, just a week after the death of his friend Antoine Hubert, and then at Monza, where he delivered Ferrari's first home win in nearly a decade. The scenes of the Tifosi flooding the track as Leclerc raised a trophy made it clear. Ferrari had found its new hero, yet his story since then has been defined as much by heartbreak as by triumph. Ferrari's struggles, strategic missteps, and unreliable machinery have repeatedly denied him the consistency his talent deserves. Still, Leclerc's loyalty and resilience never waver. He races with a purity that feels almost old-fashioned. No politics, no excuses, just speed and heart. His qualifying laps are often masterpieces. His race is a mix of fire and finesse, and his emotion after every win or loss reminds fans that he drives not just with skill, but with soul. 11. Nico Hülkenberg's story in Formula One is one of quiet excellence, endurance, and a strange poetry of a career that has come to symbolize brilliance without the reward of glory. Born in Emmerich, Germany, Hülkenberg rose to the junior ranks like a storm, dominant in Formula 3 and GP2, now Formula 2, where his combination of precision, confidence, and racercraft marked him as a future star. When he arrived in Formula 1 in 2010 with Williams, he immediately looked the part, sharp, analytical, and fast. His pole position in Brazil that same year, achieved in mixed conditions in an uncompetitive car, was the first sign of what would define him throughout his career. Flashes of genius that seemed to come out of nowhere, reminders that talent can shine even when the machinery doesn't. Over the following decade, Hülkenberg became the sport's ultimate craftsman. He raced for Williams, Force India, Sauber, Renault, Racing Point, and Haas, never in a car capable of winning, but always extracting the most from whatever he was given. His driving style was clinical yet aggressive, his feedback meticulous, his race pace relentlessly consistent. Teammates respected him. Engineers trusted him. But the one thing that eluded him, the podium, became both his curse and his calling card. Time and again, he came agonizingly close, only for bad luck, timing, or circumstance to intervene. He became, unintentionally, the embodiment of the sport's harshness, a driver good enough to win, but never in the right place to do it. And yet, his story is far from one of failure. When he temporarily left Formula One in 2019, fans and teams alike realized how much they missed his professionalism. So much, so that when Racing Point needed a last-minute substitute in 2020, Hülkenberg stepped in with barely any notice and qualified near the front, proving his class never faded. His return with Haas years later showed the same: experience, precision, and the calm confidence of a man who knows his craft better than most. 10. Sergio Perez's story in Formula One is one of perseverance, evolution, and quiet defiance, a career that refused to fade, no matter how many times the door seemed to close. Born in Guadalajara, Mexico, Perez was driven from childhood by a rare blend of talent and determination. His path to Formula One wasn't paved with privilege. It was carved through sacrifice. Backed by Mexican supporters and his country's deep belief in him, he left home as a teenager to chase a dream across Europe. A journey filled with uncertainty, yet fueled by conviction. When he finally arrived in F1 with Sauber in 2011, he wasted no time making the world notice. His ability to preserve tires and strike at the perfect moment in chaotic races made him stand out in a field of rookies. By 2012, Perez had already made his mark. 3 podiums in an underdog car, including a brilliant second place in Malaysia, showcased his gift for strategic brilliance and instinctive racercraft. He was clever, calm under pressure, and ruthless when opportunity struck, a driver who could turn chaos into art. That same year, McLaren came calling, and it looked like the fairy tale was about to begin. But McLaren was in decline, and Perez's one season there became a test of resilience rather than triumph. When he lost the seat at the end of 2013, many thought his story would fade. Instead, it was only beginning. At Force India, later Racing Point, Perez found his true home, a team that believed in him and let him drive with freedom. Over the next several years, he became the midfield's master, constantly punching above his weight, and cementing his reputation as the best tire manager in the sport. Then, in 2020, came the moment that rewrote everything. In Bahrain, after being spun to last on the first lap, Perez charged the field to win his first Grand Prix. A win not just for himself, but for every driver who'd ever been written off too soon. That victory, poetic and defiant, earned him a seat at Red Bull alongside Max Verstappen, and a chance, finally, to fight at the front. 9. Jenson Button's story in Formula One is one of grace, intelligence, and a quiet persistence that turned a gifted young driver into a world champion. Born in Frome, England, Button's journey began with raw, natural talent, a fluid, effortless driving style that made him look at one with the car. When he burst onto Formula One scene in 2000, barely out his teens, he was hailed as the next British prodigy. His early career was full of promise, but also turbulence. Flashes of brilliance mixed with inconsistency and the challenges of constantly changing teams. Yet through it all, Button carried himself with a calm determination, refining his craft, learning the art of control, and waiting for his moment. That moment came in 2009 in one of Formula One's most extraordinary stories. Driving for Brawn GP, a team that didn't even exist a few months before the season began, Button made history. Armed with a car born from the ashes of Honda's withdrawal and powered by a brilliant double diffuser design, he sees the early part of the season with 6 wins in 7 races. But it wasn't just a car. It was Button's composure, his finesse in changing conditions, and his ability to read races with surgical precision that turned opportunity into destiny. When he clinched the World Championship that year, it wasn't a triumph of a lucky man. It was a reward for a decade of resilience and refinement. After his championship, Button continued to evolve. At McLaren, he faced and often outperformed Lewis Hamilton, one of the fastest drivers of the era, not with aggression but with intellect. He became the thinking man's racer, smooth in wet conditions, masterful in tire management, and capable of brilliance when chaos reigned. Off the track, he exuded humility and charm, winning hearts as easily as races. When he stepped away from Formula One, he did so with the respect of an entire paddock, a man who had faced both the grind and the glory of the sport and carried himself with dignity through it all. 8. Valtteri Bottas' story in Formula One is one of resilience, precision, and the quiet strength of a man who spent years living in the shadow of greatness and still carved out a legacy of his own. Born in Nastola, Finland, Bottas was molded by the calm discipline and icy determination that have long defined Finnish racers. When he joined Formula One with Williams in 2013, it was clear from the start that he was a craftsman, clean, quick, and utterly professional. In an era where rookies often struggled, Bottas made the complex look simple, earning points and podiums through consistency rather than chaos. Behind the stoic demeanor was a driver of immense control, one who saw the sport less as spectacle and more as precision engineering in motion. His career took a sharp turn in 2017 when Mercedes called him to replace the suddenly retired Nico Rosberg. Overnight, Bottas went from steady midfield contender to teammate to Lewis Hamilton, a position few in the history of the sport have survived comfortably. Yet Bottas approached it with humility and fierce work ethic. In his first season, he won 3 races and helped Mercedes secure the Constructors' Championship, proving he was not there merely to follow but to fight. Over the next 5 years, he would become a cornerstone of Mercedes' dominance. The man who delivered when reliability, teamwork, and tactical clarity mattered most. Still, his years beside Hamilton were as emotionally complex as they were successful. Bottas was fast, often blisteringly so, but when margins were razor thin, Hamilton's instinct for victory usually prevailed. Bottas became the quiet soldier, the perfect number 2 in a dynasty built on perfection. Yet, even in that role, he found his own voice, his defiant radio call. To whom it may concern, F************, after his win in Russia in 2020 captured the bottle of frustration and pride of a man who'd spent years being underestimated. When he left Mercedes for Alfa Romeo in 2022, it wasn't a retreat, it was a rebirth. Away from the pressure cooker of title contention, Bottas rediscovered his ease, his humor, and his joy for racing. 7. Daniel Ricciardo's story in Formula One is one of joy, heartbreak, and the bittersweet poetry of a driver who raced with a smile even when the world around him burned. Born in Perth, Australia, Ricciardo grew up chasing speed with a mix of fearless flair and easygoing charisma. He wasn't just fast, he was magnetic. From his early days, his driving had a distinct signature: late braking, daring overtakes, and the infectious grin that followed every move. When he broke into Formula One full-time with Toro Rosso in 2012, it didn't take long for people to realize that this wasn't just another Red Bull Jr. He was something special. In 2014, when he was promoted to Red Bull, Ricciardo exploded onto the world stage. In his first year, he beat Sebastian Vettel, a four-time world champion, fair and square, taking 3 stunning victories with a mix of precision and instinct that few could match. His driving was artful, improvisational, almost mischievous. He could carve through traffic with impossible moves that looked like they shouldn't work, but did. He was a smiling assassin to paddock, adored by fans and respected by rivals. Yet beneath the charm was steel. Ricciardo wasn't just fast. He was fearless, unafraid to go wheel-to-wheel with anyone, even his own teammates. But Formula One, like life, rarely rewards spirit alone. As Red Bull shifted its focus to the rising star of Max Verstappen, Ricciardo faced the cruel politics of timing. In 2018, feeling cornered, he made a bold leap to Renault, a move driven more by principle than promise. The results were mixed. Flashes of brilliance were buried beneath mechanical frustrations and missed chances. Then came McLaren, and for a while, it seemed like redemption might arrive. His victory at Monza in 2021, a triumphant "yeah, boy," echoing to the radio, was pure Ricciardo, defiant, joyful, deeply human. Yet, as McLaren's struggles deepened, his confidence began to erode, and the unthinkable happened. He was dropped from Formula One's main stage. 6. Max Verstappen's story in Formula One is one of raw talent refined into relentless dominance, a tale of a prodigy who grew into a machine-like master without ever losing the fire that made him dangerous in the first place. Born in Hasselt, Belgium, to a family steeped in racing, his father Jos a former F1 driver, his mother Sophie a karting champion, Verstappen was raised not just a race, but to win. From childhood, his world revolved around circuits, telemetry, and the pursuit of perfection. By the time he arrived in Formula One in 2015, aged just 17, he was already a phenomenon. His debut with Toro Rosso was fearless. Lunging overtakes, impossible reactions, and a kind of confidence that bordered on audacity. He didn't drive like a rookie. He drove like someone who already knew he belonged. When Red Bull promoted him in 2016, the legend truly began. On his first weekend with the team, he won the Spanish Grand Prix, becoming the youngest race winner in Formula One history. But what stood out wasn't just a record. It was the way he handled pressure. Verstappen had an instinct for combat, an almost animal-like ability to sense space and timing in wheel-to-wheel battles. His aggression often courted controversy, but it also electrified the sport. Fans saw in him a throwback to a purer, wilder era, a driver who would rather risk everything than settle for second. Over time, though, that rawness evolved into something far more dangerous: control. 5. Kimi Räikkönen's story in Formula One is one of pure instinct, icy composure, and a quiet rebellion against everything the sport has become. Born in Espoo, Finland, Räikkönen was never built for politics or glamour of Formula One. He was built to drive. When he arrived in 2001 with Sauber, he had only 23 car races to his name, yet his natural feel for speed was undeniable. He didn't talk much. He didn't posture. He just got in a car and made it go fast. That raw precision caught the eye of McLaren, where he became the heir to Mika Häkkinen's legacy, a young Finn with quiet fire and frightening pace. Within a few years, Räikkönen was one of the fastest men alive, his driving a masterclass in simplicity, minimal inputs, maximum results. The early 2000s turned him into a cult figure. He came heartbreakingly close to titles with McLaren, his efforts often undone by reliability rather than talent. But his legend crystallized in 2007, when he joined Ferrari and won the World Championship in the most dramatic fashion imaginable, coming from behind to snatch the title from Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso by a single point in the final race. That season captured everything about him: understated, unbothered, and devastatingly efficient. While others obsessed over media narratives and rivalries, Räikkönen let his driving do the talking and it spoke volumes. As the years went on, his mystique only deepened. After a brief retirement in 2010 and 2011, during which he tried rallying in NASCAR just because he could, he returned with Lotus and promptly reminded everyone that he'd lost none of his edge. "Leave me alone. I know what I'm doing," he famously snapped over the radio during a race he went on to win, a line that perfectly summed up his philosophy. Even in his later years with Ferrari and Alfa Romeo, long after most of his generation had faded, Kimi remained exactly who he always was: unshaken, unfazed, and impossible not to respect. For Nico Rosberg's story in Formula One is one of intellect intensity and a rare courage to walk away at the very top. Born in Wiesbaden, Germany, to 1982 world champion Keke Rosberg, Nico grew up surrounded by the scent of fuel and the weight of legacy. But from the start, he was determined to craft his own identity. Less fiery than his father, more analytical, more cerebral. His approach to racing was meticulous. Every corner, every strategy, every detail studied, refined, and executed. When he entered Formula One in 2006 with Williams, he impressed immediately with his intelligence and precision behind the wheel, earning the reputation of a thinking man's racer, fast but also methodical. The defining chapter of Rosberg's career began when he joined Mercedes in 2010, partnering with the returning Michael Schumacher. For 3 seasons, he quietly measured himself against one of the sport's all-time greats and held his own, earning respect as both teammate and technician. But his career truly ignited when Lewis Hamilton arrived in 2013. Their rivalry, once born a childhood friendship, evolved into one of the fiercest and most psychologically charged duels in modern Formula One. Rosberg didn't have Hamilton's natural explosiveness, but he compensated with calculation, mental endurance, and an almost scientific commitment to self-improvement. Every year, he came closer, pushing Hamilton harder, enduring defeats that would have broken lesser drivers. Then came 2016, the season of obsession. Rosberg turned every ounce of his discipline into focus, every loss into motivation. He trained harder, slept better, studied deeper, and raced with clinical precision. He stopped trying to beat Hamilton at his game and instead mastered his own. The result was a season of near-flawless execution, smart, composed, unyielding. When he crossed the line in Abu Dhabi to claim the world championship, he looked less ecstatic than at peace. He had achieved the dream that had haunted him for years, and just 5 days later, he shocked the world by walking away. 3. Fernando Alonso's story in Formula One is one of genius, defiance, and a burning competitive spirit that refuses to fade. Even after 2 decades at the top, born in Oviedo, Spain, Alonso's path to greatness began long before Formula One knew his name. As a child, he raced karts built by his father, showing a blend of precision and hunger that made him unstoppable. By the time he reached Formula One in 2001, he was already a phenomenon, fast, fearless, and fiercely analytical. He wasn't content just to drive the car. He wanted to understand it, to bend it to his will. That relentless control over machinery, over moments, over himself, would become the signature of his career. His rise with Renault in the mid-2000s felt almost mythic. Against the might of Ferrari and the brilliance of Michael Schumacher, Alonso became the face of a new generation. In 2005, he ended Schumacher's 5-year reign, becoming Formula One's youngest world champion at the time. In 2006, he did again, back-to-back titles achieved not through dominance, but through sheer discipline, tireless intelligence, and an unshakable belief in his own ability. Every lap was calculated, every battle precise. Alonso wasn't the fastest in a straight line, but in combat he was unmatched, a master of positioning, timing, and reading races like a chessboard. Yet, for all his brilliance, Alonso's career has also been defined by the razor-thin line between ambition and chaos. His move to McLaren in 2007 meant to elevate him further, instead ignited one of the sport's most volatile rivalries, a young rookie named Lewis Hamilton matching him blow for blow. Politics and tension fractured the team, and Alonso's departure at season's end began a pattern that would follow him for years. Always a driver capable of transforming any car into a weapon, but too often trapped in the wrong place at the wrong time. At Ferrari, he came agonizingly close to 2 more titles, losing them by the smallest of margins, most heartbreakingly in 2012, when he carried an inferior car to within a few points of championship glory. Even after stepping away from Formula One in 2018, Alonso's hunger never dimmed. He conquered endurance racing, won Le Mans twice, and tackled the Dakar Rally, chasing challenges where others would have rested. When he returned to F1 with Alpine in 2021, and later Aston Martin, it was with the same fire as a young man who once dethroned Schumacher. Decades on, he remains one of the sharpest minds and fiercest racers on grid, still dissecting, still attacking, still believing. 2. Sebastian Vettel's story in Formula One is one of brilliance, evolution, and the quiet wisdom that comes from growing up under the brightest lights the sport can cast. Born in Heppenheim, Germany, Vettel was a racing prodigy from the start, focused, analytical, and absurdly fast. He joined Formula One as a teenager and immediately stood out for his precision and maturity. His breakthrough came in 2008, when, driving for Toro Rosso, he claimed an extraordinary victory in the rain at Monza, a fairy tale win that made him the youngest Grand Prix winner in history. That race was a glimpse of what was to come, a driver who could turn chaos into control, speed into poetry. When he joined Red Bull Racing in 2009, Vettel became the face of a new era. With Adrian Newey's masterpieces beneath him and an unshakable belief in his own craft, he dominated the early 2010s like few ever have. From 2010 to 2013, he won 4 consecutive world championships, blending mechanical precision with emotional intensity. He was relentless, pole after pole, win after win, yet he carried a boy's joy for racing that made a success feel almost innocent. His finger-pointing victory celebration became a symbol of youthful supremacy. In 2013, when he won 9 consecutive races, he didn't just rule the sport. He embodied its perfection. But the higher he climbed, the louder the expectations became. And when Red Bull's dominance faded, Vettel's humanity began to show through the cracks of the machine-like champion. His move to Ferrari in 2015 was more than a career decision. It was a love story. He dreamed of reviving the magic of Schumacher, his childhood hero, and bringing Ferrari back to glory. There were moments of brilliance, wins in Malaysia, Monaco, and Silverstone that rekindled hope in the Scuderia's faithful. But there was also heartbreak. The near miss in 2017, the unraveling title fight of 2018, and the growing tension as Ferrari shifted its focus to younger talent all chipped away at him. Through it all, Vettel's evolution was striking. The fierce, fiery competitor of his youth became one of the sport's most thoughtful voices, a man who began to speak about people as much as performance, about purpose as much as pace. 1. Lewis Hamilton's story in Formula One is one of vision, courage, and the transformation of raw talent into something far greater, a legacy that transcends racing itself. Born in Stevenage, England, to a working-class family, Hamilton's rise was not built on privilege but persistence. His father, Anthony, worked multiple jobs to fund his son's early karting career, and from the start, Lewis carried that sense of purpose, not just to win, but to prove that barriers could be broken. Signed to McLaren's Young Driver program at just 13, he became the face of possibility, a black kid from a modest background chasing a dream in a sport long defined by wealth and exclusivity. When he finally arrived in Formula One in 2007, the world wasn't ready, and yet he was. From the very first race, Hamilton was electric. He stood on the podium in his debut, won within months, and came within a single point of claiming the world championship as a rookie. A year later, in 2008, he fulfilled that promise, winning his first world title in the most dramatic fashion imaginable, overtaking in the final corners of the final race. That moment, when a 23-year-old Hamilton became the youngest champion in history, was more than victory. It was vindication. But what followed over the next decade was something even rarer: the transformation of brilliance into domination. His move to Mercedes in 2013, initially questioned by critics, became one of the most consequential decisions in F1 history. As the hybrid era dawned, Hamilton and Mercedes forged an empire, an alliance of precision, trust, and relentless ambition. From 2014 to 2020, Hamilton redefined what modern greatness looked like. He became a 7-time world champion, equaling Michael Schumacher's record, and shattered nearly every statistical benchmark the sport had: poles, wins, laps led. But it wasn't just the numbers, it was the way he evolved. The young, aggressive racer matured into a complete driver, calm under pressure, ferocious when challenged, and unshakable in belief. Beyond the cockpit, Hamilton became something Formula One had rarely seen: a voice. He used his platform to speak out on racial injustice, equality, environmental responsibility, and mental health, transforming himself from a champion of speed into a champion of purpose.